My name's Arman. I'm 28.
I freelance as a photographer, mostly urban landscapes and candid street moments.
My loft is on the fourth floor of a worn brick building downtown.
Small, narrow windows face the alley behind the cafes and bookstores I know by name, and the rain often hits them in rhythm with the city's quiet hum. It's the kind of place people call cozy, but to me it feels contained.
Controlled. Safe. Predictable. I live alone.
Not by choice so much as by habit.
Solitude has a rhythm I've learned to respect. On weekdays, I wake early, walk along wet streets with my camera slung over my shoulder, catch the blur of neon reflections in puddles, the way streetlights smear across asphalt, the hesitation in strangers' movements. On nights like this, when the rain has softened into mist, I sit at my kitchen counter, dim lamp, the hum of the fridge, and sort through images, rearranging them, noticing flaws no one else will see. I like the quiet, though it comes with a dull ache in my chest that I can't quite name. Sam's sister, Maya, has always been a presence I notice but never approach.
She's 24, lively in ways that make me both restless and careful. I've known her for years, and yet she feels like a different planet, simultaneously familiar and unreachable. I've caught myself studying her gestures in photos Sam sends, the way she tilts her head when she laughs, how her fingers linger on a book spine before she flips the page, the small crease at the corner of her mouth when she's amused. It's absurd, really, she doesn't need to be studied.
And yet, I do.
Tonight, rain mists the street like a veil.
I hear the knock before she appears in the doorway.
She's holding a bag, wet streaks on her coat from the drizzle. "Hey, Arman," she says, voice light but cautious, as if she knows she's crossing into a space that's usually mine alone.
"Hey," I reply.
The word feels heavy in the small loft. She steps in, shrugging off her coat, water dripping onto the rug. I move to grab a towel without really thinking, my hand brushes hers as she folds it over her shoulders. She flinches almost imperceptibly.
I clear my throat. "Sam's out, right?" She nods, setting the bag down. "Yeah.
Thought I'd grab that lens she borrowed last month, didn't expect to bother you."
I shrug. No bother. My words feel hollow even to me.
I watch her move through the space, folding the coat, shaking her hair, glancing around as though trying to see it through my eyes.
There's a tension in small acts.
The way she adjusts the rug where the water pooled, the way she taps her finger on the counter, the way her gaze lingers on my camera bag.
I want to ask her something.
Something inconsequential, something daring, something that would bridge the distance between us.
But I don't. We move around each other like planets, orbiting closely yet never colliding.
Silence stretches comfortably, until she breaks it.
"Your new lens arrived?"
Her eyes flick to the corner where a package sits unopened.
"Yeah. Didn't get a chance to open it yet." I nod, and she smiles faintly, approvingly, as if my small life victories matter to her in some intangible way. She kneels to tie her shoelace, and for a second, she looks up. Our eyes meet.
There's a recognition there, muted, careful.
No words are needed.
I look away first, focusing on the frayed rug, the way the light from the lamp hits the edges of the books stacked on my shelves.
Time passes.
She asks about Sam, I answer with short sentences. We talk about weather, trivial errands, nothing significant, yet the weight between us grows heavier with each shared glance. My chest tightens with a strange awareness, she could turn, leave, and I'd watch her go, feeling a pull I wouldn't let myself name. I notice the way she stands by the window, watching the mist blur the city lights. Her profile is quiet, thoughtful, and I realize I've never truly looked at her like this before fully, in a way that isn't filtered by years of familiarity or loyalty to Sam. There's something fragile there, some pulse of uncertainty, some invitation to care. I find myself moving closer, not for a reason, but because I want to be near the quiet she's carrying. Not too close, just close enough to see the detail of her eyes, the slight curl of her hair damp from rain.
She doesn't move. Neither do I.
The silence stretches, a taut string between us. She finally turns, picking up the bag she came for. Our hands brush again, lighter this time, almost accidental. My mind races, but my voice is calm. "I'll drop it by Sam's tomorrow," I say.
She nods, smiling faintly. Thanks, Arman. Her voice is soft, almost hesitant, like she's testing the air between us. We pause at the door. I notice the curl of her fingers on the knob, the way she hesitates before leaving, as if she's deciding whether to step out into the rain or linger here a moment longer. I don't reach out to stop her. I only stand there, aware of the space she's leaving behind, feeling it stretch across the room, across the quiet we've shared. When she's gone, the loft feels emptier than it did before. The rain taps against the window pane, soft and insistent, echoing the rhythm of my heartbeat. I walk to the counter, pour a glass of water, and look out at the street below. Mist clings to the lampposts, streetlights blur in halos, pedestrians pass with umbrellas like muted brushstrokes on wet asphalt. I think of her again. Not in a way that's urgent, but in a way that lingers. In the small acts, how she adjusted the rug, how she left the bag near my camera stand, the way her gaze met mine without speaking. I replay each moment, noticing subtleties I might have missed. The corner of her mouth, the tilt of her head, the pause in her step as she turned to leave. I sit by the window, camera in hand, not to photograph, but to notice. The lens feels heavier tonight, as if it carries the weight of everything I haven't said, everything I'm not allowed to say, everything that's beginning to matter. By the time the rain begins to fade, I realize something has shifted, not in the world outside, but in me. A quiet, unfamiliar restlessness, the kind that comes when someone enters your life and occupies space without asking permission. I don't need to act on it. I only need to feel it, to sit with it, to recognize that this small encounter has left its mark. Solitude is no longer entirely mine. The memory of her presence lingers in the air like the scent of rain on wet concrete. I trace it with my fingers, linger in it, and let the quiet stretch into night. I don't know what will come of this, if anything. But I know this: small gestures matter, silences speak, and trust begins in the unlikeliest of moments, in the pause between a borrowed lens and a shared look. For now, that will have to be enough. Sam had left for the week, some project out of town, and somehow, I found myself living in the aftermath of that absence. Maya, it turned out, had decided she needed a temporary place while her apartment underwent a minor renovation. The news had arrived casually over a text from Sam: Maya's crashing at Arman's loft this week. Don't kill her. Love you. I'd read it twice before putting my phone down. The words were light, flippant, but the implication was enough to unsettle the equilibrium I'd carefully maintained. When Maya arrived that evening, I wasn't surprised to see a suitcase in tow, slightly frayed from travel. She gave me that faint, tentative smile that had, in small moments before, made my chest tighten. Hi, she said softly, brushing rain from her hair. I hope it's okay. It's fine, I said, though I didn't add I've been preparing for this exact moment in my head for weeks. I handed her a towel without thinking, noticing the way her fingers lingered a second longer than necessary. We settled into the loft with practiced ease. She unpacked quietly, stacking clothes in the corner of the room that Sam had once called my cluttered guest space. I worked on my photographs nearby, camera in hand, catching candid glimpses of her folding her scarf, adjusting her sweater, the small mundane movements that somehow commanded my attention. The first night passed in minimal interaction. Words were sparse, silences filled the space like a second language. She had a habit of leaning against the window, gazing at the city without speaking, while I arranged prints on the counter, each act of presence a silent acknowledgement of the other. By the second day, cohabitation started to form subtle rhythms. Morning light filtered through the blinds as I moved around the kitchen, making breakfast for myself while she perched on the counter, barefoot, scrolling through her phone. She asked nothing, said little, yet her presence pressed gently against my awareness. Do you want some toast? I offered, more from routine than conversation. She shook her head, eyes flicking to the window. No, thanks. I noticed her shoulders tense slightly, a small hesitation, a guard still intact. And yet, she didn't leave the kitchen. That small decision, choosing to stay in shared space without engaging, felt like a first tiny concession of trust. The day continued in similar patterns. We navigated the shared apartment with unspoken rules, each respecting the other's space, each noticing the minutiae of the other's habits. She left her books lying open on the coffee table, as if inviting me to read, and I occasionally did, not to engage but to participate silently. She hummed quietly while washing dishes, the sound so domestic it made me feel both intruder and witness at the same time. It was during the late afternoon, while rain returned in gentle taps against the windows, that I noticed her small gestures in ways that seemed deliberate, though subtle. She would pause in the hallway when I passed, lingering a second too long, or leave a cup of tea on the counter with no indication it was meant for me, and yet I would take it anyway. The intimacy grew not through words, but through these minor acts of shared presence. That evening, we ended up on the rooftop. The rain had stopped, leaving the city slick and shining beneath streetlights. Maya leaned against the railing, coat wrapped tightly around her, hair damp but loose. I leaned a little apart, camera in hand, framing the street below but catching glimpses of her reflection in the glass panels. "You ever notice how empty it gets around here?" she asked quietly, not looking at me. "All the time," I said, my voice low, almost automatic. "It's quieter at night. Easier to see things others miss." She chuckled softly, a sound almost swallowed by the breeze. "Like me?" I hesitated, then shook my head, though the words hovered between us unspoken. She didn't press. She only leaned further into the railing, shoulders relaxing slightly. I noticed the faintest shift, her body no longer braced against the edge, a quiet sign she trusted the space or perhaps trusted me within it. Back inside, we found ourselves in an easy silence again. I worked on editing photos while she sketched in her notebook. Occasionally, our hands brushed over the counter, fleeting contact, small sparks that I acknowledged only with subtle adjustments, not words. The loft was quiet, except for the hum of the computer and the occasional creak of the old building. Each sound felt magnified, shared between us. There was a moment when she paused mid-sketch, fingers hovering over the page, and looked at me without explanation. I looked up from the monitor, meeting her gaze. No words were exchanged, yet a shift passed between us. A quiet acknowledgement that we were noticing each other in ways beyond observation. That even in silence, we were moving closer. The next morning, I found a small note tucked under a camera lens. "I like your prints. M." I smiled despite myself. Minimal words, yet it carried more weight than any conversation could. I left it there, letting it linger, and went about my routine, feeling the subtle pulse of connection that had begun to thread through the week. As the days passed, cohabitation revealed both tension and comfort. We navigated shared meals, small disagreements over space, and moments of inadvertent closeness. One evening, while rearranging books on the shelves, her elbow brushed mine. A simple accident, yet the brush carried an intensity neither of us acknowledged aloud. "Careful," she said softly, eyes not leaving the books. I nodded, heart slightly thumping. "You too." The loft became a space of tiny negotiations, a quiet compromise in how we moved, how we observed, how we existed alongside one another. Each gesture, each pause, each glance, carried weight beyond the surface. One night, she left her sketchbook open on the couch. I flipped through it, careful, noticing the angles, the shading, the subtle choices she made in each line. Each page revealed pieces of her I had never seen, her fears, her attention to detail, her humor, her moments of softness. She hadn't told me, yet she had shown me more than any conversation could have conveyed. When she returned to the room, she noticed my reading. Instead of withdrawing, she settled on the floor nearby, legs folded under her, watching me, letting me continue without comment. Her quiet presence was both a question and an answer, an invitation to connect without forcing intimacy. Trust was slowly knitting between us in these small, deliberate acts. I noticed it in her choices, leaving her tea where I would find it, sharing the rooftop without explanation, tolerating my quirks. And I responded with equal subtlety, leaving her sketches untouched, arranging blankets for her when the evening got cold, offering space without distancing. By the end of the week, the shift was undeniable. It wasn't romance, not yet, but the intimacy of coexistence had begun. We could share space without awkwardness, linger in silences without discomfort, notice one another without expectation. She smiled more freely in small moments, paused to make gestures of care I hadn't expected, and I found myself anticipating those moments, savoring the unspoken connection. The week closed with another rooftop evening, mist curling over the city like a soft veil. She leaned against the railing, scarf wrapped tightly, hair brushing her shoulders. I stood a few feet away, camera forgotten in my hands, feeling the quiet intensity of her presence. I like being here, she said, voice low, almost a whisper, but not directed at me. Me too, I said, though I meant more than the words could carry. We didn't move closer. We didn't reach out. We only stood there, letting the night press against us, letting the city hum beneath our feet, letting the trust and attention we had built form its own gravity. By the time we went back inside, there was a subtle understanding between us. Closeness need not be declared, desire need not be confessed, trust need not be shouted. It had begun quietly, patiently, with shared presence and unspoken acknowledgement. And I knew, quietly, that this week had changed something fundamental. She had entered my world not as Sam's sister, not as a fleeting presence, but as someone whose existence could no longer be ignored. The shift wasn't dramatic. There were no grand gestures, no confessions, no fireworks. Only the slow, steady unraveling of emotional walls, the gentle recognition that we could coexist and perhaps, in time, something more. For now, that was enough. Trust, subtle as a heartbeat, had begun. And with it, the possibility of connection had stretched beyond the edges of the loft, beyond the city streets, and into the quiet spaces of our lives. I hadn't expected mornings to feel this charged. The week had passed in a haze of quiet routines and shared silences, each day folding neatly into the next, until the fragile pattern we'd built began to feel like something more, a gravity neither of us wanted to name. Maya stirred first, her movements subtle, almost hesitant, as though she, too, was aware that the space between us was no longer neutral. I lay in bed, watching her through the slats of light spilling from the window. She moved around the loft with an economy of gestures I had come to know intimately, the way she folded her sweater, the careful arrangement of her hair, the pause she always took before stepping into the kitchen. Each action was ordinary, but observed closely, it carried weight. She made tea, and I joined her silently. There was no need for words. Our hands brushed occasionally, deliberate or accidental, I couldn't tell, and neither of us flinched. The silence between us had grown comfortable enough that the space felt full, not empty. We ended up on the balcony by mid-morning. The city hummed beneath us, indifferent to the small, tentative conversation that began to edge its way out. "Do you ever think about choices?" she asked, voice low, almost lost in the wind. "Which ones?" I replied. My tone careful, measured. "Life. People. What matters?" She glanced at me briefly, then back at the street below, her fingers tracing the cold metal railing. I studied her, noticing the way her jaw tightened, the small tension in her shoulders. She was always careful, always aware of the edges she pressed against. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I reached for my own tea, letting the pause stretch between us. "I guess," I said finally, "choices are easier when you understand what you want, and harder when you don't. But maybe the hardest ones matter most." Her eyes found mine this time, and she held my gaze longer than usual. No words were exchanged, but the weight of the moment pressed down like the city lights below us. I realized she was inviting me into something she hadn't articulated, a conversation that didn't need words, a recognition of shared uncertainty. Later that afternoon, we found ourselves rearranging her temporary space. I stacked books while she organized her clothes, small acts of cooperation that felt intimate because of their simplicity. She hummed quietly, and I noticed the way she glanced at me now and then, catching my attention without asking for it. "You've been quiet this week," she said finally, leaning against the doorway. Her voice was soft, almost unsure. "Trying to observe," I replied lightly, though my chest tightened with the unspoken truth. I wanted to tell her I'd been noticing every small movement, every pause, every fleeting look. But I didn't. Not yet. She moved closer, carrying a folded blanket, and I noticed the way her hand lingered near mine as she set it down. I didn't reach for her, but I didn't move away either. The shared space between us had become a language of its own, one neither of us fully controlled. That evening, we ended up on the rooftop again. The city had quieted, the hum of traffic muted by the distance and darkness. Maya leaned against the railing, scarf wrapped tightly around her neck, hair falling loosely around her face. I stood a few feet away, camera forgotten in my hands, aware of the subtle shifts in her posture, the faint tension in her jaw, the way her eyes occasionally sought mine without meeting fully. "I'm glad I came here," she said softly, voice almost swallowed by the wind. "Me too," I replied, letting the words carry more than their surface meaning. We lingered there in silence, letting the night press against us. She finally leaned back, tilting her head slightly, a gesture that seemed to test the space between us. I didn't move closer, but I didn't step back either. After a long pause, she spoke again. "I don't usually let people in." The words were simple, almost matter-of-fact, but they carried a weight that settled in my chest. I understood without asking for clarification. Her admission wasn't a plea, it was a quiet invitation. "I know," I said softly. "And I won't rush you." Her shoulders relaxed slightly, the tiniest exhale escaping her lips. The vulnerability in that moment was palpable, and I felt the pull of it deep in my chest. We didn't need grand gestures, not yet. Presence was enough. Recognition was enough. Back inside, we found our usual quiet rhythm. She left her sketchbook open on the couch, and I traced the lines without touching them. She hummed while making tea, and I watched, noticing the tiny quirks, the way her hair caught the light, the slight tilt of her head, the soft shift in her weight as she moved around the kitchen. Later, she settled on the floor with her notebook, legs folded beneath her. I worked on my photographs nearby, occasionally glancing at her. There was a mutual awareness in the room now, a shared understanding that we were both observing, both noticing, both present. At some point, her hand brushed mine as she reached for a pen. The contact was fleeting, almost accidental, yet it carried the weight of everything we hadn't said. I didn't pull away. She didn't either. The space between us had become its own conversation, one of trust and quiet connection. The week drew to a close, and I realized the shift that had taken place. She had entered my life in a way that was subtle yet profound. Trust had been built in the smallest of moments, leaving tea where I could find it, sharing the rooftop without expectation, tolerating my quirks, allowing silences to stretch without discomfort. By the final evening, there was no need for confessions. No grand declarations. We sat side by side on the rooftop, shoulders nearly touching, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of rain and asphalt. She began, then paused, as if weighing her words against the gravity of the moment. She didn't finish. She didn't need to. I understood. I shifted slightly closer, just enough for our knees to brush. Not a gesture of urgency, but of acknowledgement. Presence. Quiet commitment. "I know," I said softly. "I get it." Her head tilted slightly toward mine, the faintest movement, almost imperceptible. We didn't speak after that. Words felt unnecessary, inadequate. Trust, vulnerability, and choice had been expressed through proximity, through attention, through the quiet acknowledgement of one another. Later, inside the loft, she left her sketchbook open on the couch again. I traced the pages lightly, noticing her attention to detail, the subtle humor in her line work, the moments of softness captured between the strokes. She watched me, not asking for explanation, not seeking acknowledgement, just allowing the shared presence to exist. That night, I lay awake in my loft, aware of her quiet breathing in the other room. The trust and intimacy we had cultivated over the week felt fragile, yet undeniable. Love had not been shouted or confessed, it had been built slowly, deliberately, through gestures, silences, and shared attention. By morning, I knew the foundation was laid. The quiet commitment between us wasn't about grand romance or dramatic gestures. It was about presence, attention, and the willingness to let someone into the small, ordinary spaces of life. As I prepared my camera for the day, I noticed the faint smile she left behind on the balcony railing, the subtle curl of her fingers on the notebook, the small gestures that had become language. I didn't need to say anything. She didn't need to. Trust had been given. Vulnerability had been shared. And in the quiet, ordinary rhythm of coexistence, a deep, human connection had taken root. Love, I realized, didn't always announce itself with fireworks. Sometimes it arrived in the small acts of noticing, in the shared silences, in the deliberate choices to be present.